Hey guys, in this video we're going to talk about the CSS Box-Shadow property. So let's get into it. So what exactly can we do with the Box-Shadow property? Well, as you probably guessed, it allows us to add interesting shadow effects to HTML elements. So it just basically helps us make things on our website look a little bit more visually interesting by adding a shadow to them, just like we have shadows in real life. So let's look at how we would go about doing that. So the syntax for this property is the following. We have our the name of the property, box shadow, and then we have 5 different things or values we can add here. So the first one is the x offset, which is the horizontal offset of the shadow. Then we have our y offset, which is the vertical offset. Then we have a blur, which is kind of like a glow that a shadow projects. You will be able to see it when we do our examples later on. A spread is basically how far away from our element the shadow goes. And color is, of course, the color of the shadow. Now, by default, it's going to be black, but we can, of course, change it if you like. Alright guys, so let's put everything we've just read about into practice. So let me introduce you to my setup here. I just have my Visual Studio Code open on the left and my browser, which is Google Chrome, open to the right. And in my code, all I have here is my basic HTML skeleton, plus I have a link to external style sheet, style.css. And I have a container inside my body with a class of container, or a div, I should say, with a class of container. Okay, that's all I have here. Very simple HTML. And in the style.css in my external style sheet, I have the styling for my container. So I gave it a width for 400 px, height of 200 px, a background color of this cornflower blue, and a margin of 30 px and auto so that it centers on the screen. All right. So that's what we're going to be working with. So let's get into it. Let's create our first shadow here. So I'm just gonna add right to our code, and let me just make a space so it kind of stands out from the rest of our code. And I'm gonna say box shadow. And for now, we're just gonna keep it very simple. We're just gonna say 10px and 10px. All right. So remember, the first value is the horizontal offset. So that's what created this one here on the right. And the second value is the vertical offset, which is this one at the bottom. Now, to see that a little bit more clearly, I can make the first one a bit bigger. So let's say 15px, and you can see that it's a bit bigger here on the right. Okay. So the next thing I'd like to do is, well, let me show you what happens actually when we add negative values. So if I put negative 15 here and negative 10, as you can see, I got the opposite what I had before, right? So for the horizontal offset, a negative value will now move the shadow to the left side of our container. And for the vertical offset, the negative value will move it to the top. All right, so it's exactly kind of the opposite effect. All right, let's go back to the positive values though. Now we're going to add our third value. So remember, the third one is what determines the blur, which is kind of a glow effect. So if I make it, let's say 15px, you can see here that I'm getting a nice kind of glow of my shadow. Let's make it a bit more extreme. Say I said 40px. You can see it's much more kind of washed out. So I'll just keep it at 15. You can experiment, of course, with the values. And next, we're going to add the spread. So remember, the fourth value is the spread. So I'm just going to make it again 15px first. So did you notice what happened here is that our shadow just kind of moved a little bit more to the right and to the bottom, right? So it basically extends the shadow around our container. Again, if you make it maybe 30px, you can see it's going to be even bigger, to the point where it actually comes out on the top and on the left, right? Which is something you might want to avoid, so probably keep it smaller, at like maybe 10px or something, if you need it at all. Of course, you don't even need to include this. And I should mention that the only two required values in the box shadow property are these first two. Okay, so the horizontal offset and the vertical offset. That's all. All right, so I'm going to, let me just keep a value here. I'm going to say 0 because I don't want anything here. I could just omit it altogether, but I want to just have a placeholder here for the spread. And next, let's add our last value here, which is for the color of the shadow. So let's say this is our default color, right? But let's say I want to customize it. So I'm just going to say purple. Okay, and now it's purple. Of course, you can add color in any way you want. You can put a hex value, you can put RGB. It's really up to you. All right, and so there we go. We have 5 different values here and 5 different things that we can control when it comes to the box shadow. So this is all the outer shadow, right? So the shadow that occurs on the outside of our container. Now, what about if we want our shadow to be on the inside? So how would we do that? Well, for this one, it's slightly more complicated. So let me show you. Now, first, I actually don't want this to be purple. Let me just keep it at the default. In fact, I think I'm just gonna have these 3 here. All right, so how do you make it on the inside of our container? Well, we're going to use, we're going to have to enter some more code here, and we're going to have to use something called an after selector, CSS selector after. So let me show you what that looks like. So we're going to say container after. Okay. This is the syntax here. And the first thing we need to do is, well, we're going to have to make an adjustment to this container first. Let me just clean this up a bit. I'm going to move it up. And at the bottom, I have to actually make my container, or give it a position of relative. And that's in order for this to work, because this has to have a position of absolute. Okay, so let me start with that. Okay, perfect. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say content, because we need a content property here. We're going to make it a blank, because we don't actually need to enter any text. Like, you could enter some text here, and then you could get, as you can see, it shows up at the top. We actually don't need this. This is not our goal, so we're going to leave it blank. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to say, let me actually just comment this out, because we don't want any shadow at the moment. Okay. So next thing we're going to do, we're going to say width is 100% and height is 100%. So what that'll do is it'll kind of cover our whole original container. So if I set a color here, if I say background color, let's say black, as you can see, everything becomes black. That's because this layer that we just added on top of our container is now on top of our original container. Okay, like you can see, if I say 50%, right? Oops, 50. You can see that it's a little bit more apparent that there's a layer that's covering our original container. Okay, but we need to keep it at 100. So let's put it back. Perfect. And we don't actually need this. This was just an example. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're going to set our actual box shadow. So let's say here, box shadow, and we're going to say, yeah, let's keep it actually, I'm just going to copy it from here and paste it here actually. Uncomment. And this time, what we need to do, and this is the important, right? As you can see right now is the same as it was before. So we need to put in a keyword here called inset. All right, and now our shadow is on the inside of our container, which is exactly what we wanted, right? Now I'm going to make it the same. Let's make both of these 15 px so they're even. Okay, so currently it's on the top and left. Okay, so the positive and negative values work a bit differently on the inset. It's kind of the opposite. So let's say that what I want to do now is I want to create my shadow effect around the whole container, not just on the top and the left. So how do I do that? Well, it's pretty easy. We just have to separate our declarations by a comma. So we're going to say comma, and then we can literally just copy and paste this again. But this time we have to change the values to negative, right? So we're going to say negative and negative. Okay, and there we go. And now we have a really cool shadow effect here around. It almost looks like a movie screen, right? Like something in the theater. So really, really neat. So let me just close this so you can see it better. So that's how that's done. Now, one thing you might want to do is very often in our containers, we actually like just to make things more interesting, we might actually have an image, right, in a background. So set a background image to our container. So let me actually show you. Let's do that together. So for our container, instead of giving it a color like I gave it here, we're gonna get rid of that, and let's get rid of this as well. And we're going to give it an actual image as a background. So I'm going to say background URL, and let's find our image. So it's going to be an IMG, and this is just the picture of Toronto, and I'm going to say no repeat, and I'm going to say center cover. All right. So there you go. So I inserted now a cool image as the background of my container, and look at that. Doesn't that look neat? It's almost like a little postcard for the city. So yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to show you. So let's just kind of summarize what we learned here. First, we learned how to set an outer shadow, right, on the outside of our container. And then we used this after selector to make our shadow on the inside, like this here. So those are the really neat possibilities that you have with the Box-Shadow property. So I hope you found it useful. Definitely experiment with these two and experiment with the different values for the Box-Shadow to see what they do. And good luck, and I'll see you in the next video.